what you should know about intelligence and the military in the Middle East today, in particular about Iraq and Iran. First of all, these are some very important issues. As we speak, and this is something that we collectively should never forget, as we speak, overseas, tens of thousands of American troops are in harm's way in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and there's the potential of conflict between the United States and Iran. Whether you're for the war or against the war, frankly speaking, is irrelevant. The bottom line is Americans are in harm's way. And those Americans who are serving took an oath, as I did and as others have, to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And a key aspect to this oath is the Constitution. You see, they took an oath to a document that defines who we are collectively as Americans, a document that begins with a preamble that says, "We, the people of the United States of America." And ladies and gentlemen, I'm looking at the people of the United States of America. So when those brave men and women go overseas to service in harm's way, they're doing it not on a whim. They're doing it to protect you. But remember, they aren't the mission. You're the mission. We're the mission. It's about us. And therefore, it's incumbent upon us to have a working knowledge about why we're asking these men and women to fight and die. You see, they're not the legionnaires of ancient Rome. These are American soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. They're us. They belong to us, and they're over there. So I think this topic of what you need to know in terms of weapons of mass destruction in the military, intelligence, etc., regarding Iraq and Iran is an extremely important subject. Because if you don't dig deeper into these topics, you're left at the mercy of others to explain these topics to you. And I have to tell you, if that's your definition of citizenship, meaning that I'm going to sit there and let other people tell me how to think, what to believe in, what to know, you're not a very good citizen. The key to citizenship and effective citizenship is to empower yourself with knowledge and information. So that's why it's an honor to be here, because I'm going to share a little bit of my background and maybe give you some different insights into these issues that are very important and are very relevant, especially for those who serve overseas. Now, sometimes I'm introduced as an expert. I'm a little nervous about that term, expert. Some people ask me often, how do you become a weapons inspector? It's not your normal job description. And I always say, well, I became a weapons inspector because I drank beer and I played football in college. I was supposed to be a European history major, which means I'm supposed to study the German language. And because of my last name and the fact that my father was stationed in Germany, I thought that I was genetically programmed to understand the German language. But my German language professor, midway through the semester, did me a big favor. He asked me to drop his class before he failed me because I wasn't doing so good. So I went over to become a Russian history major, and in my final 2 years of college, when I finally matured enough as a student to actually study, I took the Russian language. I'm very good at taking tests, and I passed these tests. It doesn't mean I know the Russian language at all, however. I went on into the Marine Corps, and next thing I know, I'm off doing the Marine Corps thing, which is a lot of fun, especially in peacetime, because it's all training, it's all fake. And I'm preparing for war. I think war is one of these glorious things. I'm one of these guys who've been brainwashed into believing that there will be rock and roll music and giant flags unfurled behind you as you go off to defend your country. Before I had a chance to do this, however, Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev signed a treaty called the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. And I'm suddenly sent to Russia to be a weapons inspector. Why? Because the Marine Corps was tasked with providing 3 Russian-speaking intelligence officers. Now, I already told you I don't speak Russian. I was a beer-drinking football player, okay? But the computer said I spoke Russian, so I got sent to Russia. I couldn't spell missile in English language, let alone the Russian language, and now I'm a lead inspector in the Soviet Union at a ballistic missile factory. You know what my definition of expert is? Being the first person to do something and not fail. See, I was the first inspector on the ground in the Soviet Union. Now, I admit to being dumber than dirt. I recognize this. So therefore, I know going into this problem, I've got a lot to learn. And I don't have any preconditions. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the first lesson of the intelligence business. If you want to be a successful intelligence officer, it's not that you have to be smarter than everybody else or know everything that other people don't. You have to recognize that you're not smarter than everybody else and you don't know anything. And therefore, it's incumbent upon you to become as well informed as possible. And that's what I had to do. I had to become a missile expert overnight. So I went to production facilities, learned how they made missiles, etc. Long story short, 2 years after getting this job, I was speaking for the CIA, audience a little bit smaller than this, and I was introduced to my esteemed colleagues as the foremost expert in the United States on road-mobile SS-25 intercontinental ballistic missiles. Ladies and gentlemen, if I'm the foremost expert, be afraid. Be very afraid. Right? But the bottom line is, because I was the first person to see the missile built, the first person to see the missile deployed in an operational status, I was the expert by definition. Now, I finished that job, Saddam Hussein invades Iraq, and I get assigned to Riyadh, Central Command Headquarters. My job is supposed to actually plan minefield breaching assaults, good Marine Corps stuff. But they lost my orders. So they end up sending me in a small little office where I have to sit down doing battle damage assessment. As a Marine trained for combat, to sit in an office during wartime is a very frustrating experience. But fortunately for me, Iraq started launching missiles against Israel in the Middle East. And a four-star general named Waller walked in the office and says, "Does anybody here know anything about missiles?" I go, "Oh yeah, Ritter's the foremost expert on road mobile missiles." So I got pulled out of the desk attached to Special Operations Forces, and I spent my time trying to find Iraqi Scud missiles in a combat and non-combat environment. One of the things I found out is that some of our best and brightest, these Special Operations Forces, who are truly, truly wonderful Americans, but they go to war based upon intelligence information. Somebody's telling them where the target is, what the enemy's doing. And as I assessed what they were saying the Iraqis were doing, it came into my mind, first of all, we had a problem. I read a paper. Again, I'm not the smartest person in the world, but the Marine Corps did manage to teach me to read. And I read a paper, and it said that there's 19 mobile missile launchers that the Iraqis are using. Then I'm reading the battle damage assessment reports, and we've killed 60. Now, I'm not a math major, but if there's only 19 missiles to begin with, and we're claiming to kill 60, we've got a problem. We're killing something that ain't a missile. And we've got our entire war effort focused on killing things that probably aren't missiles. So I sat back and said, why is this? So I looked at the intelligence information they were telling our Special Operations Forces, and basically what was happening is our experts were templating the Soviet way of thinking onto how the Iraqis would fight a war. But the Iraqis aren't going to allow themselves to be templated. They actually came up with their own way to fight a war. So you study a little bit deeper, and next thing you know, you're templating an Iraqi model, and I'm pointing on a map where I think the Iraqis are going, and we're starting to change the nature of the conflict, and that was the first time that I was arrested during the Gulf War by General Schwarzkopf for trying to start my own war in Iraq. But the bottom line, long story short on that, is we finished the war, and we hadn't killed a single Iraqi Scud launcher. The Iraqis survived the war with 0 losses. Why? Because brave men were being given bad intelligence information. Bad intelligence information derived from people who didn't know a darn thing about what they were talking about, but were imposing their predispositions on the trigger pullers. Now I become a weapons inspector in Iraq. And missiles are a big deal, you see, because missiles not only deliver high explosive munitions, missiles deliver chemical weapons, biological weapons, have the potential to deliver nuclear weapons. Missiles are the cornerstone. If you're concerned about a nation's weapons of mass destruction, you have to be concerned about the missiles. Now let's deviate a little bit, because now we're talking a lot about the technicalities of missiles. Let's talk about the politics of all this. You see, intelligence works, ladies and gentlemen, if it's done free of politics. When I was a weapons inspector in the Soviet Union, I was allowed to come up with interesting concepts and brief them to political leaders because the political leaders had bought into the inspection process. This was Ronald Reagan's treaty, and he wanted it to work. And so Ronald Reagan was willing to accept facts, fact-based evidence when it came to implementing the treaty. Now we come to Iraq in a post-Gulf War environment. You see, as a weapons inspector, I was led to believe that my mandate was given to me by the Security Council of the United Nations, inclusive of an American vote, saying we want Iraq to be disarmed. So as a weapons inspector, my job was to go into Iraq and close with and destroy Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. That is, to find out where they are and then to dispose of them. Unfortunately, that's not what the policy of the United States was. The policy of the United States was regime change, to get rid of Saddam Hussein. Weapons of mass destruction were useful to the United States insofar as they maintained this perception of Iraqi non-compliance, meaning that the Iraqis aren't cooperating. You know what? Early on, the Iraqis didn't cooperate. This was an easy attitude to sell to the American public because the Iraqis cheated. They lied. They were hiding weapons. But later, as the inspectors bore down on the problem, we were able to get a fundamental accounting of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. And we did this through hard work. It wasn't, the Keystone Cops. We actually worked our butts off in some very dangerous environments. Some of it was pretty cool. Like when the Iraqis finally admitted that they hid 98 missiles. That was a cool day. So I said, let's go to Iraq and tell me where these 98 missiles are. And I'm thinking as I get off the bus, there's going to be a field with 98 missiles. There ain't nothing in the field. I said, where are the missiles? They said, well, we blew them up and we buried them underground. I said, you guys aren't making this easy on us. So we became forensic archaeologists. That's a subtitle of inspector. We got bulldozers. We dug up the missiles. And now the missiles aren't coming out in big chunks. They're coming out in little chunks. And we have to take the missiles and every serial number we have to write down page after page after page of serial numbers. And then we take these missiles, guess where? To the Soviet Union where they're made. The factory that I was an inspector at in the 1980s. And now we ask the Russians to match each serial number to a component, each component to a missile that they built, each missile to an invoice that was shipped to Iraq. And through this process, we could account for 96 of 98 missiles. That's pretty darn good in anybody's language. CIA wouldn't accept it. When I briefed the CIA on this finding, I said, I think we've accounted for Iraq's missiles. They said, no, you're counting too much on Iraqi-provided information. What aspect of what I just said was Iraqi-provided information? It wasn't. It was based on the hard work of the inspectors. You guys have seen that show, CSI. They got 20 different derivatives of it today. They got CSI Miami, CSI Las Vegas, CSI New York. We were CSI Baghdad. We weren't as good looking as these people on TV, but we're 20 times better than they ever were. But it wasn't just hard inspection work that we did. We actually would investigate. One of our best techniques was to let the Iraqis speak. You see, I don't mind if someone tells me a lie on videotape, because I got the videotape. Then I get to hold their words against them. Have you guys seen that show, Columbo? It's an old show. I'm giving away my age right now. Peter Falk, though, great guy. But one of his techniques was to save the last piece of information at the end. So you do the big interview, you hold the Iraqi accountable, or the suspect, then you get up and you sort of pat around. Well, we used to get documents that would contradict the lies of the Iraqis, and we'd always slide the documents in at the end and contradict them and force them to tell the truth. Bottom line on the weapons inspection business, ladies and gentlemen, is that as weapons inspectors, we were able to come to a fundamental understanding of Iraq's WMD programs. Their chemical weapons, their biological weapons, their missiles, their nuclear programs. And we were able to tell by the mid-1990s that 95 to 98% of their weapons were accounted for, done away with. One of the problems, though, is that the Iraqis had hid them at one time. And the people that hid the weapons in 1991 were Saddam Hussein's own personal guards. And now we got a problem. Because in order to come to final closure, we have to prove that they aren't continuing to hide weapons. So we start investigating Saddam Hussein's private guards. Now this is a problem. Not if you're an inspector whose job is disarmament, but if you're an American whose government has tasked the CIA to assassinate Saddam Hussein, and they want to know about Saddam Hussein's private guards. So every inspection I led into Iraq to investigate the guards was an inspection that was dovetailed with a CIA effort to spy on Saddam, to target Saddam, to assassinate Saddam. As a chief inspector, there were 3 CIA-sponsored assassination attempts taking place while I was in Iraq. They all failed. One of them was directly linked to the work that my inspectors were doing. Now, if you're an Iraqi thinking that these UN inspectors are going to come in and they're going to oversee the disposition of weapons of mass destruction, but then you find out that the CIA is using these inspection teams to target your leader, are you going to be cooperative? The answer is no. You wouldn't expect them to be cooperative. And yet, every time you fail to fully cooperate with the inspectors, what happens? You get accused of hiding weapons of mass destruction. So the more you protect your president, the more guilty you become in the eyes of the world, which is exactly what the United States government wanted to occur. We went to war in Iraq for one reason and one reason only, ladies and gentlemen. That's weapons of mass destruction. You go back and review the history. They can talk all they want about democracy now, helping out the Iraqi people. We went to war for one reason and one reason only, and that's weapons of mass destruction that the U.S. government knew had been fundamentally disarmed by 1996. Why is this important? Because past patterns of behavior repeat themselves. And now we look at the situation we are confronted with Iran. Once again, we have weapons inspectors in Iran doing their job. They're on the ground. A year ago, the chief inspector, Mohammed al-Baradei, said that we have a fundamental understanding of the Iranian nuclear program. We can account for the totality of Iran's nuclear material. We have a full understanding of Iran's nuclear enrichment program. And yet today, if you read the headlines, we're being told that Iran is secretly pursuing a nuclear weapons program. The key to this is, of course, a ballistic missile delivery system, the Shahid-3. We're being told today that the Iranians are developing a long-range missile to deliver a nuclear warhead. But the interesting thing, as was the case with Iraq, the data put forward is almost 100% rhetorical in nature. Where are the facts? You see, when we were told that Iraq was filled to the gill with weapons of mass destruction, the facts argued otherwise. When we're told that Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapons program, ladies and gentlemen, the facts argue otherwise. You have to dig a little bit deeper. Past patterns of behavior repeat themselves. The Bush administration, as the Clinton administration prior to it, had engaged in a policy of regime change in Iraq. The United States government today is engaged in a policy of regime change in Iran. It is to the benefit of the United States government to maintain the perception of an Iranian government pursuing a nuclear weapons program. Now, is this true? I don't know. What I do know is that the U.S. government has not provided factually based information that backs up the speculative rhetoric that it puts forward. And as American citizens, we have a duty and a responsibility to demand of our government that they share with us this information. It's sort of frustrating as an observer and a participant to read about how UN inspectors go to Iran and confront the Iranians with evidence about their nuclear weapons program. But the evidence comes from a laptop computer that comes from an Iranian, the Mujahideen al-Khalq, an Iranian resistance group that is, its sole purpose is to overthrow the Iranian regime. The information comes to the CIA through Germany. We sit down, we look at it. They're not allowed to, the CIA won't share the information with the inspectors. The inspectors aren't allowed to show the Iranians the data. They just sit there and say, we accuse. Basically what happens is the Iranians are put in a situation where they have to prove the negative. We say a nuclear weapons program exists. You must prove that it doesn't exist. That's not how the rule of law works, ladies and gentlemen. The data must be shown. It's imperative that it is shown, not only with the Iranians, but frankly speaking, it must be shown to we, the people of the United States. Because the end product of all this could be yet another conflict that costs Americans their lives and costs our nation its reputation. So I put the burden on you. Don't sit there and become a prisoner of the government. Don't allow the government to tell you what to think or how to think. The government has betrayed you in the past. And remember, when you speak of the United States of America, the Constitution does not begin I, the President, or we, the Congress. It begins we, the people of the United States of America, and it is incumbent upon we, the people of the United States of America, to hold our elected representatives to a higher standard, especially when it comes to telling the truth about the potential of conflict that can cost Americans their lives. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you. I'll take any questions anybody has.
You've encouraged us to look for the facts, to base our decisions on the facts, to hold their feet to the fire. Where do we go for facts? If we, in such an obscure and esoteric situation, where do we find the facts?
Well, there's two routes to this, and I would, first of all, let me just say that citizenship is not easy, especially in this country, because they put a whole bunch of burden on us, we the people, to do stuff. And it's far too easy for us to take the easy way out and become sort of a consumer-based society that focuses on how I'm going to buy my next iPod, my next car, my next this, as opposed to taking the time to actually go to the library, access the internet, and study. You're going to have to study. I can't give you the magic source of information. A lot of government data is classified, therefore you're not going to be purview to. But more important than that aspect of it is turn to your elected representative. And when you go to your congressman or congresswoman or your senator and you ask the question, what position do you hold? For instance, right now in the House of Representatives in the United States Senate, they're considering 2 resolutions to impose economic embargo on Iran. Now, the House and the Senate believe that this is diplomacy, this is peaceful. How many people realize that an economic embargo is an act of war, and that Congress of the United States of America is getting ready to declare war on Iran? That if we impose a unilateral economic embargo against Iran, we are declaring war against Iran. That's not something that's being discussed with the American people. I think it's imperative that you go to your elected representative and ask them where they stand on these issues, and then demand that they explain where they stand on these issues. And ask them for the facts that back this up. Find out what data they're using, because the majority of your elected officials don't have access to highly classified information. So what you'll find out is that they're basing their judgments on somebody else's whisper in their ear. And as a citizen, I find that somewhat insulting. I would want my elected representatives to be a little bit more informed about the issues they're voting for, because there is a direct impact on where I stand. So twofold: take the time to actually research the subject. You're going to have to, do a lot of research and come up with, your own informed opinion. You can't have somebody else tell you what your opinion is. You're going to have to read as much data as possible. But more importantly, hold your elected representative accountable, because that's the strength that we have as the American people. It's a representative democracy in the sense of a republic. We elect people to higher office to represent us. We must hold them accountable for what they do in our name. And therefore, we must know what they're doing in our name before we can hold them to account.
I've had great respect always for Colin Powell, and I wonder if he was totally duped in the same way you talked about. And it sort of follows this lady's question up here. If he can be fooled, how can we as citizens ever get at the facts?
No, it's a great question. Look, I'm not here to wear my politics on a sleeve, but Colin Powell was somebody who at one time I would have voted for President of the United States. I have that much respect, or I had that much respect for the man. I've met him on several occasions. We've had in-depth conversations, and I was impressed with his intellect, and I'm impressed with his resume. Here's a man who wrote a book that said, I will not allow the mistakes of Vietnam to be repeated, that if I'm in a position of power, I will never allow myself to be buffaloed by bad information, etc. I like that in a guy who's going to make life and death decisions about my Marines and soldiers and sailors and airmen. We can't say that he was duped. Let's have a little bit of respect for Colin Powell. He was a national security advisor under President Reagan. Okay, he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He's the Secretary of State. He knows how the game's played. This man knows how intelligence information is processed. He knows, for instance, just the basic rudimentary reality of intelligence, that you don't take action on a single source of information, that you need at least 3 separately verified pieces of information to intersect before you even begin to consider this information. So why, therefore, would Colin Powell, a man with this tremendous resume, this great understanding of the system, give a briefing which is derived primarily from a single source of information, curveball? The clincher in Colin Powell's February 23rd, 2003 presentation to the Security Council of the United Nations was his discussion about a mobile biological weapons laboratory. He held up a vial of white powder and said that a few teaspoons of this material could kill millions of people. Well, the reality is the Iraqis never made dry powdered anthrax. If he was going to tell the truth, he would have held up a bottle of Diet Coke, call it and say they made liquid sludge. It has a 3-year shelf life. The last known batch came out in 1991. The only way this stuff would ever kill you is if the warhead it was in fell on your head and crushed your skull, because if it missed you, hit the ground and cracked open, it would just sit there bubbling in the earth. Useless. That's the reality of the Iraqi biological weapons program. Colin Powell knew this. So now we have to ask the question, why did he do this? 3 factors come in. 1, was he a good soldier? Meaning that he's going to support the president no matter what. 2, was he a fraud from day one, that we were just being misled from day one? 3, was he a human being capable of having pressures brought to bear on him, economic pressures and other? I believe that it's a combination of the 3. that Colin Powell is a complex individual who history is going to condemn for his presentation before the Security Council of the United Nations, and ultimately only Colin Powell can answer that question. But again, our problem as Americans is that we watched that briefing and we allowed the persona of an individual to sell us a product. We didn't ask the follow-up questions. A lot of people were asking follow-up questions, and the media is to blame on this. As soon as he gave that presentation, opinion piece after opinion piece, slam dunk, case closed. Colin Powell sealed the deal. Well, it turned out that everything he said in that presentation was wrong. There's something wrong with a system that is willingly embracing a presentation that turns out to be so factually incorrect. That's why it's imperative upon us to be asking these questions and digging deeper into this problem.
Yeah, having been where you've been, I'm just curious where you see the largest suppression of information. You were talking about the CIA taking a lot of the things that you said and then putting them back in your face saying that the information was insufficient. Would you say that they were pretty transparent with the government and then the government leaders suppressed the information, or it was primarily the CIA?
Now, I have a lot of respect for the individuals who serve in the CIA. A lot of them are my colleagues. And I would say that the CIA at the lower levels functions very well. They have some highly trained, highly motivated analysts who take a keen interest in trying to find out the truth. The problem comes in the politicization of intelligence. When you have a president, and again, it's a Democrat and Republican problem, when a president makes up his or her mind, I'm projecting the future, who knows what will happen, and says, this is the policy I want, facts be damned, excuse my language. What happens then is the CIA is supposed to be able to come up to the president and say, I'm sorry, Mr. President, facts do matter. I was taught as an intelligence officer that it didn't matter what my boss wanted to hear. I don't really care. I don't get paid to tell them what they want to hear. I get paid to tell them what the facts are. It's their job to deal with that problem set. And fortunately, when I was around, you got promoted when you told the truth. Today, you will not make it up the ranks of the intelligence community unless you play the political game. And what happens far too often is mid-level managers end up suppressing the analysis of junior analysts that are running contrary to the policy direction that the executive is running, and they only let in that data which reinforces what the president wants to hear. It's good to get face time with the president. And most presidents don't want to have face time with a junior analyst telling them that everything they believe in is wrong. They want to have face time with an analyst that's going to reinforce what the president already wants to believe. And this is the failure of our intelligence community, because we have not followed down the path of fact-based evidence. We've become faith-based, and that's not a knock on religion. It's faith-based, saying that we are going to reinforce the faith that the president has shown in a certain ideological position. That's not the way the intelligence community works. That's why we have these fundamental failures. Until someone has the courage to stand up to the president and say, no, the facts don't support what you're saying, the intelligence community will continue to be broke.
All right. Well, basically, you know, when we were in Vietnam, we were trying to basically stop a domino effect in the Southeast Pacific, where when one country turned communist, the rest would turn communist. We were scared of that, hence we were in Vietnam. I was wondering if maybe in Iraq, that's what we're trying to accomplish, create a domino effect where we turn one country democratic and hopefully the rest will see, oh great, democracy is great, we'll turn democratic as well. Do you believe that that's a factor?
That is definitely a theme that plays throughout this current Iraq adventure. And I know that people actually believed in it, that if you went into Iraq and you got rid of Saddam Hussein, who, as the gentleman pointed out, was a dictator whose policies had brought instability to the region. So we remove Saddam Hussein, we remove a source of instability, and we bring, to replace him, a democracy that thrives and flourishes, and then we use that as a model to bring down other autocratic states, repressive states, such as in Syria or Iran or elsewhere, the expansive. Look, that's the policy of the United States, stated policy, regional transformation, taking failed nation states or nation states that are incompatible with the vision of the United States, how the Middle East should operate, and transform them into nations that can peacefully coexist with the United States and our allies in the region. That's the goal, that's the objective. The problem is the execution. I mean, first of all, we have to talk about the fact that you can't impose democracy at the tip of a bayonet. It just doesn't work that way. Two, democracy has to come from within. And in order for it to come from within, if you're the occupying power, you have to have a fundamental understanding of how that nation works. The United States, to this day, does not have a fundamental comprehension of how Iraq works. We oversimplified the Iraqi problem using Saddam Hussein as a Stalinist-type dictatorship. We didn't recognize the role that tribes played, the role that religion plays, and things of that nature. By occupying Iraq, we have totally destroyed the fabric of Iraqi society, and you cannot have a democracy unless it comes from the fabric of Iraqi society. So it's sort of a flawed semantic game today to talk about bringing democracy to Iraq. There's no effort to bring democracy to Iraq today. Basically, what we're talking about is survival of our troops and to instill the modicum of security so that a non-democrat Iraqi government can stand up on its own 2 feet. That's where we're at today. It's a totally flawed model, in my opinion.
Earlier, you mentioned that with dealing with Iran, that the CIA was suppressing the location of the information they were getting of the weapons of mass destruction and weren't informing people where they got the information from. Then you mentioned that it was from an Iranian government resistance group, and you said the same thing happened in Iraq. If the CIA is suppressing it, how do you know where they're getting the information from?
Well, the CIA wants us to know what they want us to know. For instance, on Curveball, they want us to know that Curveball, without identifying who he was, provided us with wonderful sketches of trucks and of rail cars that were being modified to create mobile biological weapons. What they didn't tell us is that Curveball was never an engineer, was a known liar, was an alcoholic that the German government had already rejected. The initial CIA handling of Curveball in Germany likewise rejected him as a fraud. See, that information was removed from the picture. The only thing that was put forward is that which came from Curveball's testimony that reinforced the administration's disposition to believe that Iraq was hiding weapons of mass destruction. Here we have a computer that's provided by the Mujahideen al-Khalq. It's an interesting computer in that no one's allowed to look at it but the CIA. See, when I was a UN weapons inspector, we used to bring in computer forensic teams into Iraq because the Iraqis had a lot of information on computers. The first thing we did, because we had to run through the laws, the rules of evidentiary processing, meaning we secure the computer, then we do a complete forensic analysis of the computer to find out, as you probably know, computers tell a story. If you're going to present a computer and say, this computer has all this data, I can take that computer apart and show when it was logged into, when the data was built, establish a chronology of logic so that, the first paragraph is written first, the second paragraph, you can see a modification of the paragraphs, etc. That's the first thing that's done, and you share this with everybody to establish the legitimacy of the data in question. The CIA will not allow any non-American resource to examine this computer, which immediately tells me that I got a problem with the data. See, it comes from the Mujahideen al-Khalq, who wants to get rid of the Iranian theocracy. Past patterns of behavior repeat. It came through German intelligence. I don't know. I'm seeing a pattern here. And then it comes to the CIA. Now the CIA presents it to the IAEA, but they won't let them look at the data. Then they selectively print out data, but not the original documents, a translation of the documents, and give it to the inspectors. Then the inspectors aren't allowed to share this information with the Iranians. They simply look at it and go, here, you got to answer this question. And the Iranians are saying, well, on what basis? We come back to the mandate. The mandate of the inspectors in Iran is to operate in accordance with a safeguards agreement, not to do the bidding of the CIA, whose goals and objectives are not to get rid of Iran's nuclear program, but to overthrow the Iranian regime. That's what we have to remember. The goal of the United States is regime change in Iran, and the inspection process, it appears to me, is being used once again to facilitate this objective. We should demand that that data be released and shared, because it's not American data. No American lives are at risk. It's a computer that's supposed to have all the documents that talk about how to build a bomb. Why not print that stuff out, give it to the inspectors, and let the inspectors share it with the Iranians? So, habeas corpus. You've got to basically show them the data that you've accused them of. It's basic, fundamental rule of law, ladies and gentlemen, but it's not happening right now. Thank you.